Hello, Pierluigi.
Hi, Bernd. So
Hey.
I don't see you, but I hear you. Okay, here you are. Here you are. Welcome, and thank you so much for your availability and understanding. So we would be really keen to hear your thoughts about what can be the role of getting a deeper understanding of the effects of culture on so many different levels and how this connects to the broad agenda of the KIC for the future.
Yeah, thank you, Pierluigi. I guess I have now 2 days time to elaborate. Am I correct, or do you want me to give the short version of 2 minutes? So this is, in fact, one of the key questions, how the arts, culture, and creative industries can be a driver for change. And of course, there are many drivers for change and many tools to do so. But an innovation community, as we are building it now, is quite a unique tool, because it's not just a program, but it's really building an organization. So it's organizational structure within, but at the same time, optimizing the ecosystem in the sectors. So in an ideal world, this company might have served as purpose. The ecosystem is optimized and gives culture its role of changing society. And then you don't need this innovation community and company any longer. However, this innovation community is built in a way that the structure is to be self-financing in 15 years out of the sector. So it's kind of a circle of benefits only if this company and this organization can contribute to make the arts, culture, and creative industries more effective and optimized, to contribute to this change, if it's the SDGs and many other topics we have to change, then obviously there will be a benefit back. There will be membership fees, earnings. So this kind of circle of change is what this company, this EIT innovation community is about in a wider governance scheme. Of course, this innovation community and organization has certain strands of funding called strategic objectives. There are action programs where you can apply to. And while all those are single projects, they might not necessarily induce change because the setting around them is not yet supporting change. Let's take, for example, the capital side. How to get finance for this change cannot be only financed by public funding, but how do cultural creative players receive more easily philanthropic funding, non-for-profit funding, seed funding, crowdfunding, but also venture capital funding. In many sectors, we find systems for this, databases, meeting points, pitching events, like the Web Summit and in Lisbon and many others. In our sector, such a structure for the whole ecosystem in Europe is missing. So this is an ecosystemic gap we are addressing by providing such a structure in the future. Another ecosystemic gap we see, which needs to overcome, is a silo of cultural policy. So cultural policy is often not cross-fertilized with business, urban development, with foreign policies. And thus, it's hard time to take the effects of the cultural sector across society. So we are creating a policy optimizer, a policy club to overcome this phenomenon many of us know. You are between the stools of economic department and cultural departments. Either you are too economically and lose your cultural value, or the other way around. And the third ecosystemic gap I want to point to is the knowledge gap. A lot of innovations driven by arts and culture are not properly monitored. In fact, not because there is not an interest to do so. Museums, institutions, the Goethe Institute, like we have them as a partner, or also small cultural initiatives, also civil society initiatives, have a hard time to find tools to monitor the immaterial value of their cultural collaboration and activity. So to balance the agenda of material evaluation, the turnover, the visitors, and all these kind of quantifiable indicators, to add this for a more balanced, holistic view of the whole impact of culture. So this is an ecosystemic gap we also want to address by a platform, by a tool we call the knowledge tank. You also could call it, in other words, an observatory for culture creative industries. But it's more than that. It is not just observing data, but also incentivizing and empowering stakeholders like you likely here have at the conference to apply those tools themselves. So again, it's an ecosystemic change we have, not just have great monitoring tools for us and the funded projects, but to give this to any interested player who might not be even interested in innovation, who might not even join this innovation ecosystem. Still, we provide a value as an EIT culture and creativity to their mission. So with those three big gaps, capital, knowledge, and structures, this innovation community, the EIT culture and creativity, is trying to really empower the arts, culture, and creative industries. And maybe that's the last point I want to make. I say here on purpose the arts, culture, and creative industries, because we are quite aware that the overall abstract definition of the creative industries has still not really trickled down to all stakeholders. If you speak of creative industries, it sounds too much like industry as to include a public library, or just, a dancer, a performer, a choreographer doing his work, though the choreography might be played globally, but he's not working as an industry. He's doing choreography maybe 2 or 3 times a year. So we have to really mind our language, to develop our language further, and to use an inclusive language as much as possible. And this is maybe the biggest hidden agenda of this EIT culture and creativity, to bring together all those different stakeholders from universities, research institutions, businesses, startups, companies which are founders but don't think of themselves as startups, to use all those different languages, to respect the diversity, but still harness and unleash the collaborations across silos and also across languages and prejudices. So Pierluigi, this was the 5-minute, 30-second version. And we have some interesting questions to debate, and I can be, even though it's so short, of help to your great event today. I'm really sorry I cannot be with you in real, but in mind and mission in all cases.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Bernd. And we appreciate a lot your flexibility. If there is, do you have time for just one quick question from the audience, or how is it?
Yes, no problem to have another 10 minutes
good.
for question.
So I start making a quick question myself. What has emerged very clearly from the conference here is that this agenda is not really Europe-wide only. It's an agenda that has an immediate global reach, because, of course, there are so many experiences also outside Europe that are going on, and by the way, have been impressively documented here today. You know that generally European projects have a difficulty in reaching out outside the European space. How do you see the future strategic development of the KIC as it concerns the outreach outside the European borders?
Yeah, I'm really bold and not very patient on that. I think we can be and we must be a game changer on that. Many cultures, the Chinese, obviously, with the Seidenstraße, and many others have global strategies. And Europe is still emerging in this. So this innovation community has the capacity to have a global strategy and outreach. And for this reason, we have a variety of partners to harness the diversity of messages we have. On the one side, creativity and culture as a source and as a skill in democracy and a free space to decide. The freedom of the artist and the freedom of the entrepreneur is in the end not to be separated. And the freedom of the citizen, of course, also not. So for this, we have partners like In Place of War, Goethe Institute, who work on culture as the intrinsic value-driven mission. to collaborate in the world, not to lecture, but to give an offer to collaborate. And that can be done much better than today. The second strand is we have a business to promote. Out of cultural ideas, you have global markets. You don't have to think of Adele, but of course, music, film, IP, content-driven industries is really strong in Europe. We have stories to tell and to sell. So how do we enter foreign markets much quicker than before? And this will be a second strand of global action. And the third strand will be around really not just promoting Europe as a global place to be and a successful innovation area, but really to contribute to the global task we have. This is cooling the planet, keeping to the Paris Agreement, working for the SDGs. So we would be really honored, also with the help especially of the Italian government, as I may say so, as we are in Italy now, to contribute to the G20 agenda and the COP conferences and to play our part in this global duty.
Thank you very much, Bernd. Are there questions from the audience? No, it seems you were absolutely clear on this. So thank you so much, Bernd, for your interventions. And looking forward to the next exciting developments of the KIC Culture and Creativity.
Yeah, thank you so much for the invitation, and have a rest good conference.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye, Pierluigi.
Ciao, Bernd.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Okay, so at this point, I give the floor to Pierpaolo so that we can start with the...
I invite the speaker for this section, please. And thank you to the audience to be here today. And I invite the first speaker.
So thank you for the invitation. It's a great honor and pleasure to be here with you. I will help you. Dorota Weziak-Bialowolska, it's in Polish, but you can pronounce it as... No, that's okay. As you wish. And today I'm going to talk to you about my experience with research on health and well-being impacts of culture. So this started when I worked for the Joint Research Center, European Commission Joint Research Center, and the project was commissioned to us from DG Regio to examine determinants of city life satisfaction. And we looked into the data, and what we found was that satisfaction with life in a city varied considerably, both inside city and across Europe, but one of the determinants of city life satisfaction was cultural facilities, actually access to cultural facilities. And at this moment, a question appeared in my mind, why is it so? And that's why I started looking into this more specific associations between culture and arts and their influence or associations with health and well-being. So the temporarily first study we did was about what is the association between attending cultural events and health. And we used data from the Polish population, longitudinal, observational, survey data. And we looked how much is it important to attend cultural events for health. We used somatic symptoms and self-reported health. And generally, we created an index, a count, how many times did you attend cultural events and how is it associated with future health, your health. What we found was quite interesting because we used longitudinal data and specific statistical methods. It was fixed regression, fixed effect regression, and we found that positive prospective association between cultural attendance and self-reported health and physical health. We talk here about cultural attendance, so passive participation, you may say. So another question we asked ourselves was, so maybe there is a difference between this passive participation or passive attendance and active participation. So we distinguished between participating in cultural events and doing artistic activities. And in this study, we looked into effects on, as well, well-being and health. We used British data, survey data, longitudinal data from the British population. And what we found was that engagement with arts, at least once a month, was associated with decreased strain. We examined various outcomes. I believe these were 17 outcomes, but for this type of associations, we found only one significant prospective association, and the time lag here was one year. So we looked into engagement with arts and the effects after 1 year. It will be important soon. When we examined participation in cultural events, we were interested in this participation, which occurs at least 3 to 4 times a year. And we found a set of effects, or if you want to be precise, prospective associations. We found that participation in cultural events was associated with higher scores on life satisfaction, greater happiness, and lower strain. And this was what we expected. But the following 3 outcomes were quite surprising for us. And the study we did with Pierluigi, and he came up with very nice explanation. But these effects were that if you participate quite often in cultural events, you may feel less calm and less peaceful. You may have lower ability to enjoy day-to-day activities, and you may have an increased ability to overcome one's difficulties, quite unexpected. We also examined here, because we started thinking, but are these effects equal for all people? So in this study, we were interested in examining the moderation effects of personality. And one of my predecessors here mentioned Big 5 scale, so we looked into 5 personality traits. We found only 2 significant effects on life satisfaction with neuroticism and on life constraints with extraversion. And we can talk about it more later because there are time constraints here. But the following study concerned Swiss population. And the question was, okay, but we talk about social prescribing. Sometimes people ask, so should we recommend certain types of cultural, creative, artistic activities? So if so, which ones? So in this study, we looked into very specific activities like playing an instrument or singing, taking art photographs, painting. Again, there was a distinction between involvement with the arts and attendance of cultural events. Regarding the latter, it was going to cinema, going to the theater, opera, classical concert, visiting museums or galleries. And in the previous studies, we used more, I would say, always different approaches, methodological approaches, but we always use longitudinal data and we talk about prospective associations. But one of the critique was, but you know, the gold standard is randomized control trial, right? To talk about causality. So in this study, we had observational survey data. So there was no way to conduct experiment, but there are statistical methods which helps you sort of imitate experiments. In this study, we used propensity score difference in difference estimator. Econometricians knows that this is sort of a classical way to limit the risk of correlational evidence and to talk more about causality. So in this study, unfortunately and disappointing for me, we found no effects of any of these specific activities on, in this case, health, feeling depressed, somatic symptoms, and self-reported health. Which color? Oh, no, not yet. And life satisfaction, so well-being measure. The time lag was 3 years. And it was like, I think, 2016, and I got a little bit disappointed, and I started asking myself, is it worthwhile? I was aware of previous studies reporting that after 20 years, you have higher chances of survival, there is better longevity, etc. But with my own studies, I was like, what have I been doing wrong? So I moved to experiments. So if I was not able to find not so much convincing for me evidence, I moved to experiments. At that moment, I didn't have any ways to conduct experiments, but I thought, okay, maybe we can find evidence on impacts, so in this case, artistic interventions on specific outcomes. And with my colleague, who is cultural researcher, we decided to examine the impact of theater interventions in experimental or quasi-experimental studies on social competences. And actually, why we did so? Because this type of studies can be convincing, but the limitation is that they are conducted on really small samples. So there is always this question, okay, this is experiment, this is causality, but we found it only for 20 people. Can we say that it works generally? So we conducted this meta-analysis. We identified 21 studies in which more than 4,000 participants participated. And what we found was quite interesting because it appeared that active theater participation significantly improved empathic abilities, and we heard about this today before lunch. They improved social communication skills, they improved tolerance and social interactions. We found no significant effect for the impact of theater on self-content. But still, the effect sizes, especially for social communication, were quite pronounced. And the study you heard about before lunch, so we started looking into mechanisms. That's why our interest in these mind-stimulating activities. So not necessarily looking into culture and arts, but maybe we thought that maybe it's worthwhile to start looking behind the scene, still using survey data, because we know with experiments it's much easier. So this brings me to sort of limitations and future research I'm thinking about. The questions I'm asking myself are the follows. Intensity of exposure. So maybe we should not only talk about that is it influential or is it not, but how often participation or engagement is optimal. Maybe you can overuse or underuse these type of activities. And actually, maybe these unexpected results we got for British population were we found because maybe this type of activities were overused, that participants were so immersed or go to the cinema like every day or watched film like every day. There was no space for other feelings, for feeling better even. The second question concerns length of exposure. Usually, quite often, we do not care about how long should you go, let's take this example, should you go to cinema? Is it enough once a month? Is it enough, I don't know, if I go in January and February and I can expect results in December? Or should I go like regularly every week, every month? No one asked this. It's sort of related to the first question. Thank you. Second one, and I would be, no, it's for him. It's for him, for this yellow card. And the third question is about the lag. Usually in epidemiological studies, for example, you examine exposure at a certain point in time, and then you look for an outcome in a follow-up after 12 months, after 20 years, etc. But usually no one cares what's going on with your cultural activity or artistic engagement in the meantime, which brings us to, we call it in statistics, time varying exposure. And finally, even yesterday, we heard that EU policies states that culture, and probably including cultural and artistic activities, are important in the fight against discrimination, racism, xenophobia. They can promote equality, etc. And I've been interested in examining health effects, but maybe and probably it is time for me to start looking into another aspect of this health definition by WHO, social well-being, which is also an aspect of health. So maybe And I believe, but maybe I'm wrong, but not so much is known about these effects of frequent or infrequent various engagement with the arts and cultural activities for social participation, for social inclusion, and for social well-being.
Thank you. I can call you Dorota?
Dorota, yes,
okay,
perfect.
It's better to me. Thank you very much to be in time. Thank you for your interesting speech. I think we have time for a question.
Dorota, thank you for the presentation. I have a question. There's a trend in the UK, where I'm based, towards social prescribing, and it's getting stronger and stronger. Do you think there's enough evidence for social prescribing to carry on? If not, what do we need to do to establish whether it's a worthwhile investment?
Yeah, thank you. Great question. So you are from the UK, so you are probably familiar with the research of Daisy Fancourt, right? The leading author in the field, especially in the UK, but also worldwide. So I think we have a lot of evidence, and we can start thinking about social prescribing in this area. But I believe we need to be careful about what I said about the intensity. So I'm not sure if we have enough evidence to tell people how often they should use specific activities. But maybe I'm wrong, because Daisy is publishing like quickly a lot, and I'm not always I'm not always capable of following everything. But maybe there is something recently published on this. But we are definitely moving in the right direction, in my opinion.
Thank you very much, Dorota, again, and for your inspiring presentation. I know that Dr. Palumbo will not be here with us, but I have not news about Marco Alessandrini. Okay, sorry. I invite the speaker to come. Please, I give you the floor.
Hello, I have no slides because I was very very busy. I'm coming back from another congress in Spain, in Madrid, so I had no time. Anyway, I have to talk about my experience in mental health and in the mental disorders, and the role that art has to improve the recovery from mental disorders. And I have a large practice in what we called art therapy, but now is a very complex and very rich field of research. Anyway, there is a difference between art in therapy and art as therapy. It's very different, and of course, art in therapy is when you typically use art as a component of a talk-based therapy, and art in therapy is another field when you think that the artistic endeavor is or itself therapeutic. So you use art as therapy, as the only form of therapy. Sometimes you have a verbal exchange, but just only in the final part of a group of art therapy. And we use art therapy with very severe mental disorders, as schizophrenia, psychosis, major depression, or bipolar disorder. And the result we can see is above all in restoring the self and the primary self, because during the process of a physical involvement with the materials and through the making of a significant art object, you can, yes, of course, you can express your feelings into the images, and through communication with the therapist and with the group. But above all, you can restore the self, the minimal self that you have created or not created during your first stage of growth, when you had when you was a baby, and you tried to play with the body and with the language, with face, with the sounds on the ambience and of your mother or your caregivers. So this is the self that we want to restore with art therapy in group. And of course, as Winnicott says, when you make art in a group, you are alone together. You are alone because you are protected from, you are not obliged to have verbal interaction or physical interaction with other members of the group, but you have also the possibility to see them when they are working with you and to be a part of a social group. So your social skills are very, very stimulated, and your cognitive impairment has a possibility to making sense of what is not verbally easy to communicate, to say in words. And for example, I had a patient in a group, and she worked with blunt plastic needles and scissors. Instead of cutting herself, because this is her problem, she cut fabrics and used needles to sew them together. And after several 2-3 months, she discontinued the self-injury. So it's a simple example of the way in which art therapy can channel a self-destructive way of living in a material, in an art material, very plastic, very easy to use as a way for knowing and for exploring your negative symptoms, your negative feelings, your destructiveness against the world and against others. Or in another group, I remember that we had 30 patients for 3 months, and they found that painting therapy could stimulate their social function recovery, to improve their social adaptability and quality of life, and above all, to use lower than at the beginning, at the first step, lower drug doses. And this is a very important issue because we have a biological now mainstream in psychiatry that see in use of drugs the unique or the way for a recovery from a mental problem, a mental disorder. But in any way you can solve a mental problem, a mental disorder with only drugs. It's impossible. Drugs tends to create a chronic illness, not a recovery. And for recovery, we intend create a sense of life, of your personal life. And the art is the way in which many patients can find the way for making sense of the world they have inside, because this world is with internal images, with internal memories, with internal traumas, traumatic memories in any time, in any way, that they have need to know and to create a dialogue with them. So we can see in a group, our therapy group, that many times the anxiety of one or two or three members of the group spread all over the group, all around the group, so that all the group begin to work on this anxiety, because there is also a unconscious communication from my unconscious to the other unconscious, and so the unconscious of the group make the object of our work, because it is the unconscious of the group that says more than the therapist, where is a way for a big and important recovery of a group of anxieties, of stress, of traumatic memories that are of single people, but are at the same time part of all the group. So this is another important aspect. And I think that another very useful experience that I've done is with poetry. And poetry therapy is poetic reading and writing rich in the characteristics of metaphor, symbolism, and other aspects of the language. And it is now a recognized therapeutic practice underpinned by an increasingly evidence-based. My experience with the poetry group of art therapy, of poetry therapy, is that we have to discuss the reductive notion that psychotic speech is merely an incoherent representation of a deeper pathology, instead proposing that psychotic speech could be considered as meaningful poetic. And this proposal does not seek to glamorize psychosis, but rather reflect the way that poetic is often an axiom or for an indescribable process, communicating something which otherwise would have remained uncommunicable, and therefore valuing and meaningful engaging with the poetics of an individual's narrative may lead to greater understanding of psychotic experiences and support practitioners to tune into what we call the psychotic wavelength, because when you work with a psychotic or patient in this case, because I prefer to work with very important psychotic processes like schizophrenia, for example, because schizophrenia is seen as impossible to have a good recovery, but you can discover that many people with the art therapy group can really find a way for recover from schizophrenia. And poetry therapy has been similar to other kind of art therapies, but poetry therapy has been proposed by me as an intervention which could support recovery from mental health problems as schizophrenia, not only by reducing symptoms, but also promoting positive emotions, engagement, relationships, meaning and accomplishment. Of course, there remains a deficit of knowledge examining the therapeutic potential of poetry, of our therapy, for people who have experienced psychosis. But I think that you have to choose the right materials, and you have to have good skill to restore creative faculty, creative capacities in all mental disorder. And the very, very important thing is the effect that our therapy has also for mental health practitioner, because mental health practitioner in Italian psychiatric public mental health services or centers are very, very poor in creativity. They are not able to use creativity also in verbal language, also in verbal therapy, also in explore the inner world of the patient. So sometimes we have to use our therapy in group for restoring, for recovering the creativity in mental health practitioner. So I think that I can close my short. I'm not very clear because I'm very, very tired. Any intervention with a sentence of Heinz Kurt, a psychoanalyst not very, very considered today. I don't like very much him, but I think that sometimes he had a gut intuition about the nature of the self in mental health disorders and in people with mental health disorders. Perhaps you know me well enough by now to realize that I see the major issue of life not in the terms of the outcome of the struggle for dominance, but in the terms of the outcome of the struggle to maintain active creativeness. Creativeness, however, depends in the last analysis on the ability to be in touch with a playful child deep in their personality, and thus on the ability to maintain the freshness of the child's encounter with the world. All mature creativity depends on our capacity to encourage the growth of that inner freedom. And I want to repeat, this is important for our patients, but in the psychiatric Italian world now is very, very important also for mental health practitioner. So, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. The person, I invite you to sit with us. Thank you. Some question from the audience?
Is very impressive from the point of view also of how, dramatically effective this can be for this particularly fragile and critical patients. But from the point of view of the therapist, how is it possible today, even for example, for somebody from your field, but without a specific preparation in this regard, is it possible to intervene and to make use of this kind of approach, or how do you see, let's say, the pathway to a possible extension of these practices in your profession?
Yes, of course, it's a very important question because I've not talked about it, and this is the great problem, of course, the big problem, because we need to have great capacity to specialize our mental health practitioner in art therapies or in creative therapies. And of course we need to introduce creativity and creative experiences in a mental world, because it's very, very, very poor, very lack, is a great lack. There is a lack of creativity in all mental health practitioners. So I've tried sometimes with with good results, sometimes with no very good results. I've tried to do the courses of activities with trainers, of course. But it depends in the vocational choice that the mental health practitioner has done. If really he or she has decided with passion to live and to try to live with mental health patients or not. And so is the central core, of course, of the problem.
Thank you, Dr. Alessandrini. Then, as I announced you before, Dr. Palumbo is not able to be with us today. Then I give the floor to Francesca Lionetti from the University of Chieti.
Good afternoon, and thanks a lot for having invited me to join this workshop. I'm very excited and always embarrassed at a talk, even though it's not the first one, but it's every day the same. So what I will talk you about is environmental sensitivity, which is an individual trait. It's about the environment, but not only the green environment. So as you will discover, it's related to a broader definition of the environmental features. A bit about myself. I studied here in the north of Italy at University of Pavia, where I did my first research experiences as a postdoc. Then I moved in London in 2016, thanks to Marie Curie funding at Queen Mary University. And then I was lucky enough to discover the D'Annunzio University of Chieti-Pescara, where I'm based since the end of 2019, beginning of more or less COVID 2020. So the aim of this talk, I would like to introduce you briefly to what environmental sensitivity is and its role on well-being, but also maladjustment, depression, anxiety, potentially, how we can assess it, and fields of application. So I will both share a bit of the research I've been done and I'm doing, but also more broadly, what are the fields of application, because hopefully, my idea is that hopefully this will potentially provide you new ideas and connections with the work you are doing. So think about yourself. Are you highly disturbed by strong lights, noises in the background, coarse fabrics? Are those type of sensory sensations disturb you? Do you consider yourself as someone with low sensory thresholds? And do you tend to become easily overwhelmed when you have a lot of things to do? Or if you are in a crowded room, do you need to step out and simply sometimes go to the toilet or take a break just to be out of the crowd? But are you also deeply aware of subtitles in the environment? Are you easily moved by arts and music? If this is the case, then probably you are among those highly sensitive persons that are more aware of things in their environment, because for example, brain biobehavioral studies show that their brain process things more deeply and they react more strongly to things that are around them. This makes at a behavioral level highly sensitive people more reactive than proactive, meaning that they do not approach from the beginning the environment, but they enter an environment, and especially when it is new, they need the time to stop and process what is going on before responding. So these differences in terms of the approach to the environment have been identified across different species in animals. For example, in birds, between oaks and doves. So like doves are more reactive, whereas oaks are more proactive. They don't need the same time to process things. And in humans, we have defined this with a metaphor, with a flower metaphor, to capture this increased sensitivity to stimuli. This metaphor, which at the beginning was just an orchid and dandelions metaphor, and then we added the mid group, the tulip group, is a metaphor that has been defined to capture individual differences in the sensory processing sensitivity of events. Why orchids? Because orchids is probably also like your experience that if you take care of them, you give them the right water, they can flourish to a higher extent than other flowers. But if you forget about them or you cut them in the wrong position, then they won't flourish again one year with the other. So they are strongly dependent on the quality of your care. And in individuals across children, adolescents, adult sample, not only university students, but also like general population, teachers, social workers constitute around 20–35% of the population, depending on the studies. At the beginning, the rest of the population was traditionally defined as low in sensitivity, so as dandelions. Why? Because they grow up everywhere, they don't need any type of specific care. More recently, we found evidence that this is not really the case, so it's not that 20–35% of the population is highly sensitive and the other is low sensitive, but there are evidences driven by data on several independent samples that the majority of the population has some sort of medium sensitivity levels that we define, introducing this tulip metaphor. And this, I think it's important because it shed more light on what it really means to be very low in sensitivity. So this is a very understudied population. What environmental sensitivity is about. Let's think of a negative event, like for example, the COVID outbreak or child maltreatment. I am a developmental psychologist. So there are some children or individuals that are resilient, where others are more vulnerable in response to these events. But at the same time, we can define the resilient one as simply low in terms of sensitivity, meaning that they are not much affected by the environment, as for example, the environmental stimuli I showed you before, whereas those that were vulnerable in the face of a negative event are probably just highly sensitive. Thanks to the positive psychology movement that this morning has been also mentioned, if we enlarge the focus towards the positive environment, well, you will probably see that those that were resilient in the face of adversity just continue to show a stable level of functioning, even when the environment is positive, whereas those that were more vulnerable, traditionally considered as the difficult children, for example, outperform the others. They flourish when the environment is positive. What we know nowadays, based on twin studies, is that this trait is partially heritable, but there is the space, also an idea that at least in adolescence is partially influenced also to some extent by the role of environmental experiences. And there are also some interesting studies. If you are maybe in the psychology field, you may have heard about like Boyce and Ellis, or like the idea that there is some sort of early programming in the environment that you meet immediately after birth. I heard that you have already talked about personality traits, and what we know is that it's not fully captured by any personality trait, even though it shows a correlation with both neuroticism and openness, especially in relation to the artistic interest, which I think is really relevant for the current symposium. But it's not fully captured by any of these, nor by their combination, meaning that if you put together all the big five personality traits or all the temperament traits with infants, they explain around 30%, no more, of the variability in this trait. It has a dark and a bright side because it has been associated with both depression, anxiety, but also, for example, a stronger responsiveness to intervention effects. And how it can be assessed. It can be captured by a variety of markers. In terms of the physiological markers, there is still a bit of debate if we should consider resting, for example, cortisol reactivity, cortisol level, or cortisol level in response to an event. The same for other like respiratory sinus arrhythmia. So in the physiological field, it is really debated to what extent it can be really captured by physiological marker, but there are several genetic studies that show that it has a genetic, an association with specific gene, and it can be phenotypically observed by validated self-report, parent-report questionnaire, or observational measures with the infant or child behavior coded by the expert. Just a bit of field of application of this trait. So, for example, it has been extensively studied in personality and the clinical field of research. One long debated question was, and it still is, to what extent does it overlap with traditional personality traits, also considering the facet level? And now we have increasing evidences that it correlates, but it's not fully captured by personality nor temperament in children. Another field of application is, for example, its role in moderating the impact of intervention. And we have evidences showing that those more highly sensitive individuals tend to show stronger responses when confronted with prevention or intervention program. And this is what is referred to as a sort of vantage sensitivity. In the organizational field, these are just like a few examples. The research is really at the beginning, and the Riccardo Palumbo research group is trying to incorporate this construct as well into the organizational and economic field. And in terms of green meditation, some very recent studies, for example, we are investigating its association with the green environment. We found evidences that highly sensitive individuals perceive more the beauty of the green environment. They are more connected to the natural environment. And with data we are currently working on, it seems for them, the green environment has a higher restoratory role than not for low-sensitive individuals. For example, it seems that mindfulness is really important, and training that focus on mindfulness. If you think just briefly, like for example, about the experience of parenting or being exposed to overwhelming stimuli during the first week of a child life, how, like for example, training parents on mindfulness or simply step and relax before responses could be important for a brain that processes everything more deeply. And if you think, for example, at an infant cry, temper tantrum, prolonged sleep deprivation, etc. Another field of research is that of gene. Traditionally, it has been associated with single gene variation, as, for example, the short transporter of the serotonin, the short allele of the serotonin transporter gene, or with the DRD4 and DRD7 dopamine receptor gene, probably because of both the association with neuroticism and the tendency to feel a reward when experiencing something positive. But nowadays, there are more evidences that probably can be better captured by a sort of genome-wide approach. So it's a complex trait, and it's difficult probably to be captured by only one genetic variant, but there are evidences also in this regard. And related also to the topic before, there is a very interesting study where they, for example, some colleague from the University of Leiden suggested, well, if we don't consider these environmental sensitivity differences, could it be that we miss the effect of intervention or an environment, or for example the importance of going to cultural activity, because for the majority it doesn't count, but there is a low minority for which it counts a lot, that statistically can be just covered by findings from the majority, and maybe for them is especially important because they tend to be more prone to depression or negative feelings. Another field of research, the one I've been more work on, is that of parenting and child development. Now we have observational measures for coding this trait. There are evidences that when the quality of parenting is negative, they tend more than others to internalizing symptoms. We have data from the age of 3 until the 10 years old, including both observational measures and child-reported measures. And what it happens that, for example, children highly sensitive at 10 and 12 years old self-report more negative feelings as depression and rumination when they experience at age 3 observed a high level of environmental sensitivity. And if you think at the increase of internalizing problems and at the early onset of internalizing problems in children, in the general population, that's particularly important. So to conclude, or maybe to start with different directions, well, sensitivity involved a minority, but a significant minority of the population. In all studies, they say like around 15%, but more recent studies suggest that indeed are a bit definitely more. the susceptibility is for better and for worse. It's important in terms of the risk of increasing maladjustment, but it can also predict flourishing. And our recent idea is that can these children be also, like, for example, if you think of the green issue, be champions of pro-environment behaviors, like, for example, in peer-to-peer education, because they are more aware and positively connected to nature. And we know that peer-to-peer programs works more than other programs. Or what about sensitive parents or children in the school context? Could they be like more positively attuned leaders? And what about creativity and culture? Because the sensitivity it correlates with an aesthetic sensitivity and with the facet of the openness dimension of personality that is about arts and music. So to conclude, I just would like to thank all the people I've been working with, I'm still working with, Michael Plues, now from Surrey University, just moved in 1 week ago, Elena and Arthur Aaron from the Stony Brook University, Marie Curie funding that supported me, Jacobs Foundation funding, and the Bial Foundation funding that supported or still are supporting my research, and the Baby Lab team with all my colleagues from here, Fasolo, Spinelli, Giulia, and all the other great PhD students. And because the sensitivity construct is so interesting, there are a lot of websites and blogs discussing on this. Be aware that there are a lot of not evidence-based things, so this is why the Jacobs Foundation founded this website that we developed just to spread evidence-based knowledge on this topic, and you can also take the self-test here.
Thank you. Thank you, Francesca, for this interesting presentation to be in time. And we have time for some questions. I am not my field of research, but I know that the personality is something very stable. And do you think that this sensibility is, we can train these? What's the time, the dose response on this training, if, even though I wonder, on your presentation, and I don't know if...
in terms of stability and also response.
Yes.
We don't have yet longitudinal studies because the framework it started to be developed for adults, and now we are gradually moving this framework of sensory processing sensitivity into studies. So honestly, we don't have yet proper longitudinal data to evaluate, for example, disability. We know from other related fields and theories, right, from other colleagues working on related traits, that it has probably a window so that in the first months of life, it is important, besides genes, the quality of the environment experience. And the idea is that very high quality or very low quality environment makes you potentially more sensitive as captured by others.
Thank you. Another question from the audience?
Actually, the question could be to two of the panelists. Do you think, Francesca or Dorothea, that there might be a chance of deriving an analytic filter from Francesca's data to parse some of the data out of these studies, because maybe there are certain populations that are more susceptible or more, stronger beneficiaries of cultural and creative interventions? That seems to be the implication. Do you see any potential there, conceptually or statistically?
No, is it working? Yeah, it seems so. Yeah. This is exactly my thought when I heard Francesca talking about it. So, are there any instruments to measure environmental sensitivity available?
Yeah.
For adults,
for adults, everything started like with adults. So there are like easily self-report measures, reliable and validated across samples.
Were they
12 items?
Okay. Were they implemented already in some longitudinal surveys?
Where they were using lab-based study, brain studies. So there are like evidences that they work properly with different population, like from teachers, students, general population.
Okay, so I think you're encouraging us to start collaborating.
Because
I think it's a great idea.
Listening to your presentation, there may be some interactions.
Exactly, because as you said, and as you are suggesting, some people may be more prone to be influenced.
Yeah.
This highly sensitive.
Yeah.
So it's, for me, it looks like a moderation effect, which could be there, like interaction, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
We definitely need to think about something.
New connections.
Other question? Then I would thank all the speakers for your inspiring presentation and to be in time. Then I give the floor for the next session.